everyone, it's Catherine here from Inky Finger Cat, back with another Christmas in July project. Yeah, cracking on with these. I'm starting to lose the will to live. No, I do love making Christmas cards, but I am starting to struggle a little bit with ideas, so we'll see how we get on, whether we'll get to the end of the month or not. Hopefully I can get to 31 projects, you never know. Okay, so I've chosen a very old magazine kit and a piece of craft card, and I'm going to make my own pattern paper. And in the end, I end up making 3 cards from this, 2 very similar and 1 slightly different, but you can see that they're all basically from the same idea. So I am taking the stamps and I am having to stamp multiple times because the inks that I've got aren't particularly great. They're not particularly juicy. I also made a slight mistake in that I didn't leave enough space to do all of the stockings several times. So one of the stockings gets a little bit like not really used, but it doesn't matter. I used a mix of inks, so we've got the distress inks in pine needles, and then Stampin' Up inks, a very old one called Riding Hood Red, and then Early Espresso for the brown. And then I bring in a minute some of the baubles, and I do those with Evergreen Boughs in the distress inks. So real mix of inks. And it's basically a half a piece of A4 is what I'm using as my base. And as I say, I'm going to cut it up and make 3 cards from it. So I'm just making sure that the whole page is covered and that there aren't any dead obvious gaps. Making sure I stamp off the edges as well. That helps make it look like it's a continuing piece of pattern paper. And I've made sure I've moved the stamps around different directions, etc. Now I'm just taking a little bit of that gold shimmery paint and doing some splatters all over. I do give it a quick set with the heat tool, but then as it is, I end up setting it aside and working on the toppers. So I love this deer. I have used him probably at least several times every year since I've had this magazine kit, which is probably maybe 10 years, maybe something like that. I just love him. I think he's beautiful. So one of them I stamped onto white and did it in Early Espresso, and then the 2 that I did on the craft I did with gold embossing powder, so you can see there the shine. And then I set to and fussy cut out. It's not difficult to fussy cut this particular image, but it is a bit fiddly, especially around the antlers. So don't worry, I don't make you watch me cut out 3 images. I pause after I've done the white one, turn the camera off, and then do the others off the camera. Okay, so they're all cut out, and now I'm going to just turn this into 3 cards. I do it quite simply with, I cut 1 panel that's going to sit just inside a white frame as a full background piece. And I realised as I was using the tape that it doesn't work very well with that craft. There's a bit of texture to the craft cardstock. And I say cardstock, it's quite flimsy. It's more of a paper than a cardstock. So that's just 1 full background sheet. And the other one, rather than having a full background sheet, I decided to go with some sort of diagonal halves. And then I'm just deciding whether it's going to work or not, and I decide that yes it is, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment alongside that that cut mark, that diagonal, and I'm going to use the same sentiment on all 3, but the final one I decide to do as a separate sentiment strip and create that onto the white with the Early Espresso and then mount it onto craft. So they're quite simple. The bit that was a little bit fiddly was the cutting out, and then I ended up using this copper twine, and it's very fine thread rather than twine, and I just created a little puddle of it underneath my deer. Now you can see that I'm just slightly stacking up with those scraps of cardstocks, the bit behind his head, but I am sticking the antlers down so that there's a little bit of dimension, but it's not like fully stacked up. Again, all of them I do exactly the same thing with in terms of stacking up the bit behind the head, and then glue on the antlers, stick it down, and then you can see I've just popped something heavy on to make sure it sticks. So the two cards that are very similar, they're just basically offset. I've put the sentiment on the opposite sides, and therefore the deer sits on opposite sides. I do have a tiny little red mark that goes on one of the white bases, which is very frustrating, but never mind. Okay, so I'm just deciding here, do I need another layer? And I do decide that, yeah, all three of them are going to have another mount of the craft cardstock. So I just take another piece of it and then stick it down. Each of them looks slightly different again with the mats because they've got slightly different dimensions going on around the outside. This one in the middle ends up with a very thin extra strip for an extra mat. And then this final one, I give quite a wide mount, just so that, again, they're all a little bit different, but pretty much the same, if you know what I mean. So I did use wet glue on all of them, slightly regretted it with those that have got the white at the bottom, but, you know, they're a little bit bobbly, but they'll do. They're handmade cards, not Hallmark, as people say. So you can see here in the close-up some of the shine that you can get if you get a different angle to the picture. So you can see all of that shimmer in the background. I just think it's gorgeous. And then the gold embossing on the two craft stag heads. But I actually think my favourite is that one. It's the one with the white head and the full background. Okay, sometimes simple works. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Please do give it a like, comment below, subscribe to see more, and until next time, goodbye.